The first step I usually take is to leave the lamp housing on to protect this mechanism and paper while I flip it over to work underneath. And then I'll come back and remove this and even the binding nuts and binding screws before I start working on the surface. As mentioned previously, you'll see the build date of June of 1953 on this one. Now the first thing I do is remove the bottom covers or plates. One is the large plate that goes here, and then a smaller plate, this one, and both plates have already been washed and cleaned, that goes right here. The next thing I'll do is right here, I'll remove a small plate which holds the plunger and the spring, paying careful attention to the upside of the spring and its position, maybe even using photography to make sure that I place it back in the same position. When that's complete, I will remove the screw right here, it's on this right here, that attaches the link assembly, which is this, to the frog, and then it frees it up to move left or right. The next step is to remove a small plate right here that covers the plunger and the spring. I usually make photography of that and photography of the position of that knob right there on this link assembly before I do the disassembly. Now as I remove all the screws for the plates, and so far there's been 3 plates, I map those onto a pencil drawing of all 3 plates and the relative position of each screw, or the actual position of each screw as it appeared on the plate. Now, that's not really necessary. I mean, it's not, I don't think it's super mission critical, but what I have discovered over time is that what works best and produces the best results routinely is to place screws back to the position that they were in before, and that just seems to work best. Once those screws that hold the switch mechanism, this thing right here, in place are removed, you can kind of drop this down. Now just don't what's worked best for me is not to overhandle it, compromising any of these connections. Now, have these connections been compromised in the past? Yes, they have. I've literally almost had to rebuild some of these studs that the nuts go on, that the binding post nuts go on, because that they're loose and turning, or there's a bad connection. Of course, on the bottom of this, I check all wiring connections. So now I want to show how I remove that link assembly. I think it's important to access the plunger that's in this solenoid. The interior of the solenoid needs to be thoroughly cleaned. The plunger needs to be thoroughly cleaned, and I have found these in a wide variety of conditions when I separate these. You want good action out of that plunger and that solenoid or coil to move this mechanism in and out that controls the frog. So I usually take these down to this level in order to specifically to clean that plunger. The first thing I do is I'll take this mechanism and pull it toward me as far as it'll go. Hold that with my left hand, and then my objective is to get this tab out of that slot. And there'll be only one tab in the slot. And sometimes it takes a little twisting and bending, but eventually it'll come out and it falls out. Same thing going back, just a little careful bending and twisting. And just keep playing with it until you feel it go in, and then it's locked in. Coming out, the mechanism towards you as far as it'll go, just a little bending and twisting, and before you know it, you have the separation. Now that's as far as you're going to get this assembly, the switch mechanism assembly, disassembled. At this point, I clean the interior of the plunger, the interior of the coil extremely well as far as the remaining parts of the mechanism. I make any adjustments to the paper that's necessary, and by the way, this paper, of course, is available to replace, and the red goes toward the end that's away from me, and I somehow, if necessary, I reinforce those either with glue or tape. Doesn't really make any difference. The bulb is going to produce a little bit of heat, but hopefully it's going to stay cool by convection because of 2 things. On mine, I use 24-volt bulbs. They are not overly bright, and I don't think they produce excessive heat, not like the 14 do. If the 14s are in here, they produce a fair amount of heat on the top of these. But even though there's the hole for convection cooling. I insist on my layout using 24 volt bulbs, and I've got to order some extra ones on these switches because they simply last longer. That's been my experience. 14 definitely go out pretty quick. 18s fairly quick. The least little short on your track will usually take them out. But 24 volts, because they're slammed all the time by the mechanism, I find that the 24 volts work extremely well. So this is nothing more than cleaning and polishing of this particular mechanism. Now, as far as the link assembly, same thing. I'm careful not to alter the position of these springs, although if they are altered, I'll take needle nose pliers at the base of each spring and bend it up and make it uniform with the other spring, which they are here, and then I proceed to polish. Alcohol wipe and polish everything, including the plunger. And this one has been thoroughly cleaned. They need to be dry as they go into these coils. It doesn't matter what kind of coil you have and plunger. They're designed to be dry, not to be lubricated.